So today, good afternoon, and I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Adeline. I'm from the Budaya team at Leaderonomics Digital, where we talk about engagement and we help organizations enhance their team performance and therefore their business outcomes. Okay, so let's get started here. Right, so just a few housekeeping rules before we begin. So during this webinar session, we are required you to be muted, but don't worry. You may raise your hands, or if you have any questions, do drop them in the chat box, or you can drop them in the Q&A. There will be a Q&A session at the end of this webinar towards the last 5 to 10 minutes. So keep your questions until then. And then we will allow you to unmute yourself. Okay. For the survey, at the end of the survey, we also share with you. We'd love to hear your feedback. We appreciate that you do share what your thoughts so that we can improve and also maybe share the recording after this with you. Okay. Right. So I'd like to introduce a few agenda that we'll be talking today with you. And we have a special guest speaker. We have Roshan Dhiren. So he'll be taking you through employee experience, how it fuels your business growth, and also some case studies to show examples of how bad culture can break down your business. Also a little bit on the budget for employee experience and how do we take the first few steps towards improving that engagement. And lastly, some software solutions to help you with your employee experience. Okay, so just a very brief summary of what Roshan's profile is. He is formerly the Director of Global Talent at Johnson & Johnson. He has worked for GE for the 14 years across different regions from the US, Europe, and Asia. He's known as a thought leadership and is an international keynote speaker, and he serves on several boards and also continues to mentor people in the space. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Roshan as he tells us about how employee experience can make or break your business. Welcome, Roshan. Roshan, can
you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Great.
All right. Thanks, Adeline, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on which time zone you are in. Very quickly, Adeline briefly talked about. I spent about 15 years or so in a company called General Electric, and then a couple of years in Johnson & Johnson. And one of my most interesting, I think, experiences was, I spent my formative years in GE, mostly in the US, and then a little while, I spent a year and a half or so in Europe doing integrations of acquisitions. But when I came back to Asia, that's my 8th role, I took on a very interesting assignment. I was mostly in the banking or the financial services line. And I was essentially spent a bit of time in the TV space, but one of the things that I got an opportunity to do was to basically sort of move into the aviation space. So I came back to Malaysia to run the aviation business. And I'll tell you this, I mean, it's one of the most life-changing experiences I've had, because when I came back, I remember this is the second day of work. And I came in as sort of the executive director. And I got a call from our customer. We had one customer at that point in time, Malaysian Airlines. So it's a very small shop, about maybe $30 million in revenue and losing about $60 million in revenue at that point in time. And I got a call, and our customer at that time, Malaysian Airlines, had said, "Look, you guys just serviced an aircraft, 2 engines for us, and these 2 engines were mounted onto a flight that was going from Kuala Lumpur to sort of I think it's Delhi, and halfway across the Indian Ocean, both the engines sort of tanked, and somehow the pilot was successfully glided the plane to Chennai, not to Delhi. And the customer was furious. Hey, you guys are servicing our engine, and that's what the shop did, is overhaul and service engines. And yet, we just service engines with you, and both the engines malfunctioned, in a flight on a 2-engine aircraft, right? So it was kind of terrifying what had happened. Now, I was trying to figure out what had happened. And then again, I don't have aviation background. And then about 2 weeks later, I hear an explosion. And so I rush out and we go to the test cell. Test cell is where you test the engines. And I find that, somebody, basically they do a quick post-mortem and they say, look, somebody has taken papers, right? The ones they've used for photocopying. Basically, somebody had taken paper and stuffed it into the engine. And when they tested the engine, it basically caused a minor explosion. Now, in aviation, an explosion is explosion, right? Costs you millions in terms of issues. And this is my, again, second or third week this had happened. And I was asking myself, what is happening? Because a few days later, as we searched for answers, we realized that nobody can go inside the test cell except our employees, which means that an employee had sabotaged our own company, their own company. Basically, somebody had, an employee had put photocopy paper inside the fuel tank of a jet engine, causing that to sort of malfunction and explode. And I was asking myself, what kind of organization is this? Now, the worst of all in this organization is that the productivity was really bad, one of the worst in the world. Just give you an example, turnaround time is when the engine comes into the shop to the time the engine leaves the shop and goes back to the customer. Now, typical aviation overhaul organizations can do it in about 60 to 70 days. That's what average overhaul shops do. And the best in the world would do it in about 40 days, right? So these are really good companies like IHI and a few others, right? Our shop, this shop where I was in, it took almost 450 days, and our average was about 450 days. So there were engines there were 600 days, 700 days. We took on average 450 days to service an engine, which means a year plus for a customer to give us an engine and get it back, right? And to me, it was like, what happened? Why is this? And every time I tried to drive change, I tried to say, hey, we need to do things better. We need to do things faster. We need to do things more efficiently. We need to get this done. We need to bring costs down. All these cries, even though you're the leader of the organization, whatever you said went to deaf ears, because they'll go back and say, you don't know anything about aviation. This is a compliant industry. This is not banking, Banking is like nothing, right? I mean, you guys are compliant, but that's not real. This is real, life and death. And there's so many different mandates from FAA, DCA, and so on and so forth. There's so much compliant requirements. You don't know anything, shut up and sit down, right? And it was very frustrating, right? Because you knew there was opportunity for us to drive this, but at the same time, you couldn't. And if you move to the next slide, Adeline, one of the things that was interesting is that, in this shop, over the next 6 months, 12 months, no matter the first 3 to 4 months were very frustrating and things couldn't move. And then I started to say, I think let's look at it in a very different perspective. Let's look at some of the frustrations the employees were facing, because many of them refused to change. They refused to do things differently. No, this is how it's done. This is what I know. This is the way it's done. You don't know anything, And so I started to look at the frustrations of my employees. And I started to say, what is frustrating them? Why is it that they cannot move? Why is it that they cannot grow? Why is it that they cannot, push themselves to the next level? And so, as I noticed someone's asking about the slides. I'm not sure how it's viewed, but Adeline and Sashi, if you can sign up. If the slides are too small, let us know, and I think the team will try and figure it out. But it's just a picture of the shop, my aviation shop, right? And so one of the things I started to do is saying, let's understand their frustration. And we found there were a couple of areas they're frustrated with. First, we found a lot of our guys were frustrated with the way we did sales. How do we went to market? And then there was a frustrations with understanding of information. Somebody communicated this, somebody communicated this, I'm saying this, they felt others were saying this. There was some sort of misalignment that was happening. And at the end of the day, there were other sort of frustrations. You pay me to do this. Why you ask me to do that? I'm paid to do this. Why am I going to do this? Why should I help him? Why should I do this? And as I started to understand some of these things, I realized the employee, there were a couple of things and a couple of big insights. And if you move to the next slide, Adeline, a couple of big insights that I looked at is one big insight I got was that it's not that these people hated change. It's just that these people and my employees, they didn't like the pain of change, right? And how do we help them? So, when we tried to change one thing and then change another thing and another thing, it was like shooting bullets. So you got hit by a bullet, and then a month later you got hit by another bullet, and then you got hit by another bullet and another bullet. So it's constant change. and there was a lot of pain, and they were just rejecting this pain and said, no more change, no more pain, right? And the other thing that was very insightful, and this is where I'll share a little bit about some of the science that came up from the work that we did and in this site. Because what happened is, as we started to look at these insights, we started to make change, right? So I realized that, what I say doesn't matter, because people don't behave to what the leader says. People actually behave according to the policies, the structure, the compensation, their manager, right? People behave according to the system of a structure of an organization. Now, the other big insight I had was that actually there were a lot of that sort of beliefs that were reinforced by the rituals, right? So we had a certain ritual where, you have certain breaks, and during the breaks, people will go outside and smoke. And they will, sometimes they will supposed to be a 15-minute break, they will be 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and they smoke and say, this and that, and so on. But we had certain rituals. We had a tree outside that was very strategic, very cooling, a tree that enabled people to smoke and chill and feel free. And it's kind of a ritual. People just went there and hung out during the break, and then they went to the canteen and so on. There's certain like mini rituals that were being practiced. And I said these rituals were reinforcing certain ideals, that it's okay, not to conform to time. It's okay to do this. It's okay because our customer doesn't mind. It's okay, and so on and so forth. And I started to realize that, there was another big ritual, another big belief that was resident, is that, we are in Malaysia, and we all Malaysians, we are lousy one. We all know good. I mean, how to compete? You say the best in the world is in this country. They're all different. They're Europeans, they're this and that, and so on and so forth. So there are certain beliefs that were constraining us, right?
Roshan.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll stop sharing, and then
Sure.
let
I'll
you
just
share the
continue
screen
here.
from your side.
Oh, okay, sure, no problem.
Yeah, because every time you speak, it picks up your voice to share your picture.
Okay, no
So
problem.
Yeah.
We'll do that.
Sorry about that, guys.
Yep, no problem. Let me do that. Give me a second. Okay, so one of the things that I started to take all these insights, and we started to formularize it a little bit. We started to look and say, okay, how do we really transform this organization? Because we realized that even though we're spending money on employee training and stuff, it was not really aligned to the imperatives that we were driving. And so we worked on a business model. We say the way we're going to sell is going to be different. The way we approach customers is going to be different. So that's one piece of the pie. But the three other bigger pieces that caused our transformation, right? And our transformation was significant, because we moved from, I was saying 450 plus average turnaround time, right? We moved to 35 days with no defects, right? We became the best shop in the world on Thompson turnaround. Our revenue moved from a $30 million US shop to about 200 million at that time. Today, the same shop 20 years later is about, I think, close to $2+ billion US, right, in revenue. They're the biggest shop in the world. They're the best shop in the world still 20 years later. So it's not like, okay, we did a turnaround 2 years later, and then 5 years later, it just, went into nowhere. It kept growing and growing with local leadership. And the shop today is if you're ever in Malaysia, take a drive to Subang Airport, and right across it is the GE Aviation shop, and you'll be able to see the shop, and it's run by one of the guys who used to work for me, Suresh. He runs the shop today, and it's a big span. I mean, GE continues to invest significantly in the shop now. But the secret, right, is about understanding the employees' frustration, and the three key frustrating areas is really about how do we engage them. How do we understand them first? How do we have intelligence to know what's going on? And then how do we understand how to make changes? And the first biggest issue we have is alignment, right? And alignment is very simple, right? The story from the top to the bottom keeps changing. So, we don't know where we're going. We don't know where we are. So we come up with plans that make sense to us based on where we think we should go and where we want to go. And so there's a lot of misalignment. So how do we clearly say, okay, here's the goal. Here's what we want to do. We want to be the best shop in Asia. Here's where we are with the worst shop in the world. And here's what the key milestones we need to take to get there. And then the other thing is behavior is actually dictated by structure. So we have to change certain structures. We have to put in certain rituals. We have to put in certain practices to enable employees to behave differently, right? And finally, it was about culture. And culture is a mindset. And I'll share a little bit on culture in a bit, right? And what I found was very interesting. When we started spending money on these four areas, when we started spending some funds to enable employees to flip the flip was significant because we moved from essentially everyone said, your problem is your people, you got lousy people, you pay them peanuts, you get monkeys, right? Essentially. And for whatever reason, I said, these people, I don't think that's the issue, their capability. I think what they need is leadership and motivation and be able to transform them. And when we looked at structure and culture, we suddenly saw the same people who were useless 2 years later became best in the world. And every GE shop in the world was asking me, Roshan, can you give me your guys? Can you give me this guy? Can you give me that guy? It's so good, so good, it's so good. So the same people that 2 years ago were useless suddenly transformed into significant. And I think many of us, when you see this diagram, right, you see in a company, you see people like this, small problem happen. A couple of people are trying to address the problem. The other people are watching and say, ha, 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 I'm glad this is not on my side of the business. But they forget that the boat will sink and all of us will sink together, right? And this is driven primarily by two things, right? By the structures that we create, or the systems or the policies or the way we structure our business, and the beliefs that are resident in our business, our culture, right? And as I start to look at culture, right, I want to share a couple of quick thoughts on culture and engagement. And then I think I'll pass it over to Adeline to share a little bit more in terms of technology can be used to drive culture, to intentionally design culture, right? Culture essentially is a result of different beliefs in your company. So if you believe you're a small company, and it's very interesting, right? Somebody believes you're a small company, there are two reactions. If you believe you're small, then you can think, oh, I'm agile, I'm quick, I'm faster than the competitor because they're big and clunky and they're like Goliath. You take 5 stones and hit him, so the floor will fall down, pop, right? But on the flip side, some people say small. When a big guy comes in, I run away. I'm not capable. We're so small. We don't have money. We don't have this. We don't have that. And that results in action. So what is very interesting, right, is that when you look at people who say they're small, right, it can have two sort of effects, right? One is, when we think of results and action, is a lot of it is dictated by the beliefs. If you think we're small, so our actions become small. And as a result, we get small results, right? If we think we are incapable, our actions will show that we are incapable and our results will show incapability, right? But if you want to change belief, you cannot change beliefs by just saying, okay, guys, you guys should change the beliefs. No, we are big, we are bad, we are good, we are happening, we're the greatest in the world, and so on and so forth. And it's the same thing when I set up Leaderonomics many years ago. I say, look, we're really good. We have methodology that is world-class, right? And when I go to Stanford University and I talk to the provost and others, they look at us, oh, you guys are amazing, right? But when you talk to your own employees, right, they have struggled to believe that they are really good, right? Even though we are, right? And you cannot change beliefs by telling people about it. You have to change their experience. When they experience a customer saying you're amazing, when they experience somebody globally saying, wow, you're amazing, then they start to change their beliefs. And this is dictated by what we call rituals and processes, right? Or structures that we impede. How do we change certain experiences? And these experiences will change beliefs, and these beliefs will change action. When I was I moved to New York City in the year 92, right? And it was the worst, probably the most crime city in the world at that point in time, the most murder in the world per capita at that point in time. You fast forward 4 years, and I remember in 96, I was walking through Times Square. I'm like, ooh, safest city, one of the top 10 safest cities in the world. In 4 years, the murder capital of the world transformed to the safest city in the world. And if you read up the history, you will notice there was a mayor came in January 93 called Rudy Giuliani. And he believed the issue in New York City and murders was a cultural issue. And he said culture is a result, is basically a bunch of beliefs. So there were certain beliefs in residents of New York that New York's a very dangerous city. So we must all carry guns. So if somebody touches you at the back, you better shoot the guy first because they're going to shoot you, right? So these beliefs cascaded into actions. Meaning if somebody looks at you, you start to run away or you start to whack the person or you do. So beliefs led to certain actions which result in lots of murder, lots of crime, and lots of issues. And he said, look, I can't change the beliefs. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to change the experience. And so what he did was he said, I'm going to station policemen in all the subway stations. And if somebody jumps over the subway and don't pay the 25-cent token to ride on the subway, we're going to catch them. We're going to manhandle them. This is the good old days, I guess, in the US, pre-George Floyd, where you could manhandle a person. They will manhandle, whack the person up and put them in a mobile police station and then take photos, put them in the court. So for not paying 20 cents or 50 cents or whatever the subway token, they will whack and beat up this person for jumping over the subway turnstile. And slowly within the next 6 months, crime started to go down. And so, back the question, wait, what do you mean? You just went after, because the policeman was saying, Rudy Giuliani said, look, don't go after big crime. Don't go after murderers. Go after people who don't pay their subway tokens, right? And by cutting off small crime, suddenly big crime started to go down. What's the correlation, right? And if you read books like Freakonomics and stuff, you see lots of studies were done on New York City. And one of the things that's very interesting is that what Rudy Giuliani managed to do was to convince the layman who's watching this guy who didn't pay his 50 cents, get beaten up and taken to a police station, right? He must be thinking, oh my goodness, if 50 cents you don't pay, they do this to you. What if I steal $5? What if I shoot? Oh goodness, what are they going to do to me, right? And this thinking started to change their beliefs because they experienced something that changed their beliefs, that drove certain actions. So after a while, the beliefs started to say, New York City is a pretty safe city. Police are doing their job. They're catching people, even steal 50 cents, right? And over time, this resulted in the city becoming a safe city. Now, the same thing happens in organization. So what are things that you can do, right? So one of the things that we realize in employees, right? Employees are highly tuned on depending on the chemicals they have. So there are 4 types of chemicals. The endorphins, when you sort of say, guys, there's a project, we need to do it. Let's stay to 5 a.m. and just finish it. Wow, you get the endorphin kick and you're, let's do it. And then you got excited and you just do it. And 5 a.m. you're like, we feel, and then you got the sigh of relief at that 5 or whatever time you finish that project, right? But that's one. And a lot of companies use that. They use the endorphins to keep employees excited and energized. But that is not long lasting because you can only do so much of endorphins. At some point in time, people get stressed, people get cortisol, which is a very negative anxiety sort of chemical that your body produces. Then there's dopamine. When you achieve a goal, when you succeed doing something, you feel good. You reward people, you get dopamine, right? Then there's serotonin, which people call this a leadership chemical. But this is where when you sort of lead people, when you sort of do some acts of leading, or some acts of growth, you kind of get serotonin that just kicked off. And finally, there's oxytocin, which is what we call the chemical of love. But this is when employees talk to each other, when they're born, when you have friendships in the company, when you start to see people engage. When say Adeline falls down, I quickly help her, and then somebody else watches this. Now, guess what? Adeline feels oxytocin because somebody helps, because I helped her. I feel oxytocin because I helped Adeline. And the person who watched this gets a surge of oxytocin because they see, wow, Adeline was being helped by Roshan, and I wow. And that's why when you watch a good movie, right, you get this feel good factor. That's oxytocin, right? And what we realize is that when people go to the gym together, right, and they feel they achieve something together, wow, that's dopamine, right? When people have a town hall and they communicate and they feel that they contributed, right? They feel the serotonin. I've given something. I've achieved something. When somebody says I'm going to help teach my colleague something, and then the colleague learns something, and then somebody watches this. Wow, that's oxytocin, right? And what we realized during the pandemic, right, is that a lot of these chemicals started to be missing because the physical presence in our office started to be less. So how do you bring back this chemical? How do you create a gym? How do you create a learning center? How do you create a town hall virtually? How do you do that so that you can actually drive what we call good culture, good beliefs, right? And that's where technology is going to come in, and Adeline will talk a little bit about some of those things, right? But the last point about technology, culture, is that culture has to be intentionally designed. What's very interesting, right? If you hire somebody from Coca-Cola, you hire somebody from GE, you hire somebody from Petronas, you hire somebody from different companies, that division tends to inherit the Coca-Cola culture or the GE culture and so on. And the worst is, if there's no culture, the default culture is the country culture. So if you're in Singapore, great for you. It's about productivity and so on. If you're in Malaysia, bad for you because we have very low productivity. Our national default culture is not a very positive culture for the business environment, right? So if you do not dictate and design a culture, it will be something that you adopt the default culture of your country. And how do you actually develop culture? You need to actually think about allocating funds. So I was listening to Horst Schulze. I don't know if you heard of him. He's the founder of Ritz-Carlton. And one of the things that's amazing about Horst is telling us about how he built that culture in Ritz-Carlton. to enable everybody to be empowered. So, he's saying, look, there was a bellboy and, was opening the doors of the Ritz-Carlton, and somebody came, hey, my TV doesn't work. And the bellboy was like, what he saw was in the past, they would say, okay, let me inform the reception, let me inform somebody. And they inform somebody who informed somebody who informed somebody, but nobody took ownership of the problem. And the guest came back and said, my TV is still not working. Didn't I tell you about it? I'm like, well, I already informed somebody. And that's what typically happens in organization. It's passed on, right? And so what he said to the bellboy, he said, look, when somebody tells you a problem, the problem belongs to you. Now, here's how it's going to happen. I'm going to give you up to $2,500 to be empowered to solve the problem yourself, right? If you can inform somebody, at the end of the day, you are responsible for the problem. You, bellboy. Hey, but my job is to open the door. Never mind. I'm empowering you to solve. It just happened to be the customer told you the problem. So the problem belongs to you. So he set up a culture by changing the structure, by allocating funds, by giving and saying, look, once somebody tells you the problem, the person who inherits that problem becomes the owner of the problem, and they have to go all of their way. And so the bellboy, once this happened, he said, oh, I'm so sorry about it. Here, let me buy you a latte, and you sit down, and I will take care of it. And he goes out there and does this and so on and so forth. And TV, within 20 minutes, the TV is fixed, right? And when you start looking at examples like that, it's not something that happened by accident. Ritz-Carlton didn't happen by accident. It was intentionally designed, structured, and rituals were put in place to enable this to happen. And of course, today, it's much more challenging, right? Because we have a hybrid workforce. How do you do it to enable rituals and other things to happen in a virtual environment, right? So the second part is, when you onboard somebody, what are the leadership rituals? What are digital rituals? How do you connect? How do you bond? How do you make sure there's dopamine and oxytocin and serotonin and sometimes endorphins, to pump them up, for that big project that's due and so on and so forth, right? And the last one is alignment, right? How do you constantly communicate and ensure that there's alignment, that people understand it the right way, right? So these are three quick sort of tips. I want to just close out in the next 2 or 3 minutes by talking about the flip side of things, right? When we look at engagement, right? Engagement is just one piece of a bigger pie, right? One of the things I really get fascinated by with marketers is marketers really know the customer. They really know the customer really well. And this is where it's very interesting. I say HR people should really know our employees really well, right? And sometimes because we don't know our employees so well, we are not so, we realize that it's disengagement. Because different employees have different points where they're up, down, left, right, and they're upset, they're sad, they're in different emotional states. How do we know how to engage them at the right time, at the right place? How do we know when something is wrong with them? And because we don't know, employees leave. They're like, this company doesn't care about me, right? Worse, sometimes you have managers, right? And this is interesting, right? Because, ever since I started using tools like Happily, I realized that, hey, goodness, I don't talk to my really good employees, right? And my best employees, this guy's no problem, and this Arun fella, no problem. He will just run, let him be, and usually things are very well. But then suddenly I get triggered, they don't seem to be so pleased with you because you haven't talked to them in 2 weeks or 3 weeks and so on and so forth. I'm like, huh, really? And then I start to realize that, even though they may be very good employees and we spend time more with the not so good employees, we realize that there must be triggers to help us to make sure we are also focused on some of our better employees and connecting with them, right? And so there's a lot of cost when you are not engaged, when your employees start leaving, when you don't have good managers and tools that are in place to enable them to be effective in terms of understanding the employee first. You have to have intelligence, and then you need to have engagement. And this is not something that is light, better engaged organizations, employees that have deep intelligence. I mean, if you are HR and you have deep intelligence on your employees, you actually are able to drive some significant numbers in your business, right? Especially when it comes to driving quality, right? High quality, right? Engagement actually drives, knowing your employee really well and being able to give them the right transaction for the right time. That's what engagement is, right? Giving them the right experience. Because remember, an employee's experience can go up and down, right? Depending on their individual state, depending on where they are. Usually when they join the company, wow, they're on a high. Wow, I'm so happy. Then when they see the company like that, then they go on a low. And then, they do a project, they get up and down. How do we make sure at each transaction, each point or each level, we give them the right transaction, we give them the right intervention that they need, that is appropriate to them? And this is where I think digital tools will be significant. And this is not something new, when I first joined GE, right? I was very happy to be paid good dollars. And I was very happy that I was one of the first employees in 1995 to have a laptop, right? Not many of our GE employees had a laptop. I had one of the first guys to do beta on email. I was part of the GE email network. I was like, oh, I'm super cool. I love GE. I'm going to stay here forever, right? But fast forward about 5 years later, I'm like, hey, or 7 years later, maybe, I'm like, hey, you pay me well, you give me all the tools to do my job. I'm quite happy there, but I want some recognition. I want my friends to be colleagues. I want to feel that I'm contributing, and I want more. I want to feel part of a belonging. And then, fast forward another 5 years, and like, hey, I want promotions. I want my peers to respect me. I want my manager to validate me, to give me certificates. I want this, I want that. I want a career. I want this. Wow. Suddenly my demands, right? And then you fast forward to the last 10, 12 years, right? You can see people say, hey, I want to work for a company got meaning one. I want purpose. I want this. And you start to see all companies start to rebrand themselves. Oh, we are a purpose-driven organization. Oh, we're Sunway, but we're purpose-driven, this and that. And everybody's dancing that dance, right? And what we see is that what really employees cling to is for you to know their state, for you to know where they are, whether they're entry level and it's financial issues. And I want you to know me, so that once you know me, you can focus me on the right thing, right? Because once you know an employee, once you have deep insights on them, you can focus them on the right work. Because when you focus them on the right work, guess what? They get this dopamine surge when they achieve. They get this sense of serotonin, right? The chemicals start because I'm doing stuff that's contributing to the business. But it's also the next piece. Once you focus them, right? I also want the employees also want the second piece. I want you to care for me. I want you to know that my boss cares. And the last part, I want to grow, right? But you can only focus, care, and grow an employee when you know them, right? And this is where intelligence is very powerful. And one of the things I say, there's many dimensions, right, of understanding or knowing, right? To me, when I look at employee engagement, there's 11 real dimensions that you need to look at. You need to know their levels of happiness, their relationship with their manager, their relationship with their peers. Are they getting enough feedback? Are they growing? Are they well mentally, physically, and so on and so forth, right? There's different dimensions that you need to deep in. And really, the essence of this comes from intelligence. And the best part is actually, as HR, we actually get a lot of intelligence. Is that we're not piecing it together. Because once we understand the employee, what their needs are, what the key trends, what sort of the wants are, right? We also have wants, right? Some of the employee maybe wants, right? And then we can start to really create an employee experience design that enables you to get engaged, and then you get all the benefits of transforming an organization. And transformation really starts with that earlier part. And the only way you can do that is through technology. And part of it is, how do you budget for this? How do you put some funds? And I know L&D, especially in countries like Malaysia, where you got agencies that say 1% of your cost must be for L&D. But I think even more strategic will be intelligence and engagement, right? At least like 1 or 2%, or maybe 2% needs to be set aside for you to look at the inputs that you get in and be able to manage those inputs and start designing an employee experience. Remember, culture is actually is something that you have to intentionally design. It's not something you do by accident. So I think with that, I'm going to pass the time over to Adeline. And I'm not sure whether we have some Q&A or some questions that we can take, but I'll pass the time over to Adeline, and Adeline, you can go from here.
All right. Thanks, Roshan. Thank you for that formative session. Okay. So can you see my slide well, Roshan? Sorry. So I'll be talking about solutions for organizations and embracing the new normal. So Roshan has talked about creating the employee experience. So how do we bring it to, how does technology actually helps us in this area? So I'd like to borrow a statement from a CEO. And he goes, I admit that we do not implement our new initiatives well. Every time there's a new culture experience that we want to develop, we want to implement, we start to see difficulty, challenges in changing people's behavior or people's mindset. Right. So then we think about the guidelines that we know. So usually most companies will have company values, publicized, our core values, things like agility, innovation, diversity, integrity. But how are we really faring in practice? So there is a research done over 500 companies. So they picked up 9 typical values, core values, and they wanted to see how the relationship is between the values that they proclaim and the culture that's actually happening on the ground, right? It's interesting to find that from 1.2 million employees, this research is done in the US, they actually found that there's hardly any correlation between the company values and the culture that's actually really happening. Even shockingly, that some of them actually had a negative relationship. Right? So it actually begs the question, with all that money that we've invested, are the efforts that we want to create the culture done the right way? So Roshan talked about creating experience, borrowing from the results of pyramid, where the foundation actually is creating that experience where people get to feel what it is to live out that core values or that mission for that company. So how do we do that? So the key I actually want to stress is continuously to engage and respond to your employees. So how do we engage and respond? We make them feel heard. So every time they share their values, they share their voices, their thoughts and opinions, we evaluate. It gives a sense of purpose for them so that they feel heard, and then they make their ideas that they contribute is made part of the business decisions, and there's opportunity for success and growth. So all this actually creates a positive employee experience. Now, the key strategy that I like to highlight is actually continuous response. So when we talk about signals, these are the things that we see in an employee's life cycle. So when I talk about employee's life cycle, it starts from onboarding all the way to development, performance, and of course, the end, which is departing. So how it looks like, it will be, maybe they'll experience something positive, which is a smooth onboarding. Or it could be something negative. Maybe they felt that they missed an opportunity for development, or they didn't have that, guidance and support to have that career progression. So all this, what we call signals, and then the actions that we input, that is the output of what we're going to do in the continuous cycle. So remember, engagement is nothing that happens overnight. It has to be something sustainable over time. So it has to be a repetitive, continuous cycle that we want to put into the effort here. Okay. But let's talk about the new normal, right? The business climate is always changing. It's so very volatile at this moment, especially post-pandemic. We've seen a lot of changes. We need to adapt new policies. Organizations as well are becoming leaner as we go. So really, we have to embrace the new speed that we're working right now. Everything has to be fast, and we have to adopt new policies. We have to change our mindset. So just as how we adapt, implement this continuous response, we also need to make our actions even quicker. We have to make it timely and relevant to those actions. So here's what I mean. So for example, if an employee raises an issue coming towards the project, they have difficulties, they're not having support. So if this has been raised from today and we actually have a lag time, maybe 2 to 3 weeks to respond to the action, maybe that person actually had to make decisions which is not the most ideal, but that's what they had. They only had that information at the time. So if you're not able to intervene or support them, then our actions post 2 to 3 weeks is no longer relevant. So really, we want to shorten the time gap between when the signal is triggered, what the employee actually experiences, to when we actually respond to them. So how do we as business leaders make this happen? So before I go into it, I'd just like to talk about the different generations of employee engagement solutions. So talking about the first generation, we have what everybody knows is annual engagement survey, where we have questions repeated on an annual basis. Every year to year, we ask questions like, have you received the right amount of work, or right amount of recognition for your work, or things like, how do you feel about your business alignment, team alignment? Or do you think that the business is making quick decisions? So all these things are all focused on benchmarking, but they're really actually far from action, because at the end of the day, after 1 year of waiting, you need to process the data, and then you'll have reports, and then having discussions and action plans. So there is a huge time lag. So moving on to the next generation here, which is called phase 2. With the rise of mobile phones in the 2000s especially. So this is when we actually move to pulse surveys, and it can be every month or sometimes even as frequent as every week. And this is where we actually focus a lot more on the feedback, because it happens so frequently. We're able to collect that data, whether a person is feeling happy or whether they have some comments or improvement, so on and so forth. But the cue here is the focus is on feedback, but it does not necessarily channel the information to the right person. Maybe it needs to go to certain people in the management team, or maybe it has to go to HR, compliance, so on and so forth. So there is still some room for improvement. So here I'd like to show about generation 3 here. So this is what we call intelligent systems. So for moving from a pulse check-in, what are we going to do with that data? So with intelligent dashboards here, what it actually does is collates and aggregates all the data and turn it into actions for the people who use it. So we present data and trends, and the system will then trigger out action plans or nudges, or tells us reports or areas of where we need to look at. So it can even go as deep as highlighting to you which business units are having critical issues at the point in time, which is real time. So what's important is actually all happening in real time. It can also track improvement. So you have a baseline of where they are right now, or how much they have improved based on the support interventions that you do. And also it can even highlight to you the people or individuals that are actually having a risk of turnover. Now with AI also, they also help you with nudges. So we have things, sometimes we help highlight to managers, without systems, imagine you have a lot of physical work to do, and it's hard to really schedule a time to remind yourself, okay, I need to check in with this person. There are certain milestones that I need to check in, or maybe have important conversations. So what it does actually, it helps trigger a certain points based on the response of the employee. So it's highly and relevant to them, and it makes most sense to them. It's because it's so personalized. So you can look at things like nudges talking about, so maybe that person has responded that they don't feel that the company alignment is very strong or very clear. And based on that feedback, the system, for example, will trigger you as a manager saying that, hey, maybe it's time to look at our goals, or how are we communicating them, or how are we aligned? Are we doing more than that? So those kind of triggers. And also sometimes we have, employees saying that we're not having enough opportunities for development or personal growth. So there, based on that system, based on their response, we will trigger elements of analytical thinking, critical thinking, also to boost them and to show them where they're actually starting from and how they're actually progressing along the system. So many things they can do. AI also helps give suggestions on how, as a manager, you can respond to your employee. So this is very useful, especially for new managers, and they might not necessarily be so exposed to the culture of supporting and open feedback. So this is where AI actually helps them. So the key here is actually that we want to get to a time gap which is really, really short, almost to the point that it's immediate. So whenever an employee feels maybe they're not great, or maybe they have some input they're not satisfied with, we really want to shorten the gap so that we'll be able to respond timely and make sure that the employee experience stays healthy throughout. So the last one that we want to achieve is actually generation 4. Now, this is more of the future where this continuous response intelligence ultimately sends out information to the right party. So it's not necessarily just to the management or HR anymore. It could even be to compliance team or to IT team, depending on the subtle input that the employee gives in. So this is more coming up for the future. Okay. So we talked about software solutions helping us make continuous response possible today. But let's take a look from a different angle. Going back to having company values, why is that important? Why is values of practice almost across all companies? So foremost, it actually acts as a guideline. So everybody remembers that it's a key word, it gets repeated and highlighted. But there's actually more to that. We know things, we all agree, like if I throw out some values like agility, innovation, or diversity, we all will agree that it's something positive. But everybody has a different take to it, different notion to it. But how leaders we can actually add valuable impact is actually really to spell out the exact expected behaviors that you want to see to each value. So how it helps is because it creates that consistency. When it comes to different functional teams, it helps coordinate activities. So that will actually correlate and come back to the employee experience that you want to drive. Right? So let me explain a little bit better about how does articulating it really mean. So here's a sample from NVIDIA. They're actually rated one of the top most innovative companies globally. And this is their take on innovation. Let me read it out. So we know our path to discovery will be paved with mistakes. We anticipate and avoid the ones we can. We accept, learn from, and share the ones that occur. So I'm sure you agree with me that this is such a crystal clear expected behavior, almost dictating to the part that, it's okay that you make mistakes. Advance up front, we accept and learn from it and share it. So down to that crystality. So how do we practice it? So every opportunity that you have, declare your expected behaviors all around every platform that you have. So if you have LMS, if you have intranet portals, if you have HRMS, you can even use hashtags, right? So let's borrow from NVIDIA just now, accept, learn from, and share. Maybe hashtag that and put it on your wallpaper desktop or the banners that you have in every system. You want to keep repeating and lauding that expected behaviors, right? If you have an engagement system, that's even better because all these features are already built in for you, and it actually builds a very solid ecosystem where all these features actually keeps you glued together and creates that influential impact in that community itself. So you can do things like rituals, having rituals of team shout out every Friday. If you don't have systems, that's fine, but you can do things like having that ritual every Friday. Let's do a half-an-hour shout out where everybody writes on the board, or if you have teams, you can put in the chat. I want to congratulate someone and so forth. I want to thank someone for doing this excellent job because they learn from it, but most of all, they're able to overcome. So things like that. You can even create quotes again, wrap it out and tie it to your culture or the experience that you want to deliver, the behavior, and repeatedly engage with them and show it to them. So have a few more minutes. Let me wrap this up. So really, I want to share with you that this technology is not far from you. And in Budaya here, we do have that technology to share on how we can use intelligence to drive the intentional, engaged workplace. So now with AI, we can help you deliver check-ins, timely feedback, and it helps eliminate that HR work. And we want to enhance and empower the line managers for helping them have insights right directly to their emails. So you don't have to go pass through different people, different stakeholders. As a line manager, you'll be able to see who is actually feeling, who is at risk of turnover and what exactly are the areas that they're struggling in. So there are things that built-in recognition and fund personalized employee benefits. So that's the other area that we also help with engagement. So that's the front part of how an employee experiences it. But when you talk about software, really the data is what is most important. So Roshan did mention about the different engagement indicators like satisfaction, relationship manager, personal growth. Now, all this ties back into this intelligence system, and you'll be able to see that who are the people who are at highest risk, and all this is in real time. How are your managers doing, or how your cohorts are doing? If you have high performers, high talents that you want to create a special cohort, all this can be customized as well. And lastly, here at Budaya, we do understand that a system will always be a system, but there needs to be a human element that drives it. So we have this training package that we will complement the system with training, monthly in-house training. And this is something that we're offering special package up to 30th November, where we have 12 different modules, one module for each month. And if you sign up before this date, then we actually will also add in an extra virtual workshop to deep dive on employee experience topic to the needs of your organization. So what's great news is it's HRD claimable for this training package. For non-ML clients, of course, there will be a different package for you. So we do have a couple of minutes and we'd like to take some Q&A sessions. So we'll open the floor. If you do have any questions, to drop them on the Q&A and we'll pick it up from there. Any questions at all, even to Roshan or to myself?
Hi, Roshan. Thomas here. Can you hear me? Hi. Sorry.
Hi, Thomas. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, no problem. So, from your standpoint, right, from being like top management and stuff, how do you start a culture movement in a company, let's say, that has not had a strong culture or strong belief in culture, right? I mean, everybody wants it, but what's like that starting point, that gets it to trickle down from, top to bottom? What would you say would be a good starting point? Sorry for the simplicity of the question.
No worries. I see Roshan unmuting yourself.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Am I good?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great question. And I think one of the things, and maybe I can draw this out a little bit. Let me just pull a whiteboard out. So and hopefully you'll be able to see the whiteboard. One of the things I think the starting point is to have some clarity on where the organization is going, because you cannot create a culture unless you're very clear the purpose of the organization, the end goal. So, to some extent, you must have a clarity, everybody in the organization must clarity of vision. If you haven't done that, I would suggest you guys start working on, sort of vision clarity. What's the purpose of the organization? Why do we exist? And if you read Satya Nadella, who is the CEO of Microsoft, you read hit refresh, right? One of the first things he did as CEO is say, look, we need to hit refresh. We don't know where we are going. We don't know who we are as Microsoft. Let's start with that. Now, once you have that, you kind of know where you are. Today you're here, right? So if you say I'm here today and I want to basically make that transition here, you will start to say what are sort of key milestones that you need to hit. Now, for you to achieve this milestone, and this may be in 2 years or 3 years, whatever your timing is to hit a milestone, one big milestone, knowing that you're on this path towards a long-term goal, what sort of behaviors, and I call this MBS, right? It's my old school, MBS, Managed Voice School, but it's simple to understand. What sort of mindsets do we have today that we need to change? Right? So these are beliefs, right? What sort of mindsets do you have today that are not helping us to get to this point, right? So you kind of do what we call a quick audit, right? And say, what mindsets do we have today? And are these derailers or are they enablers to where we're trying to go? Now, what sort of behaviors do we have today? Are they enablers or are they derailers? I want to eliminate the derailers. I want to figure out what are new behaviors I need to have that will enable me to get to this point. Right. And the last part are what we call skills, right? I mean, what are sort of technical skills, functional skills, leadership skills, and so on that I need to have to enable me to get to this point, right? Because capacity and capability will be crucial for you to move your organization to this point, or to achieve certain like key results that you need to achieve, which is point number 1, and then another key result, point number 2 and number 3, and then ultimately you achieve your big vision. But that there has to be this clarity of why you exist, of where you are, and what is the first milestone that you need to hit. Because once you do that, then you can start to intentionally understand what are mindsets, behaviors, and skills that are needed. And each of it will be starting your cultural transformation. You will start to say, okay, skills, I need to do some training and development, some exposure. I need to benchmark against best practices. Behavior, I need to change some structures. I need to add in different sort of policies. I need to change the way somebody reports and my org chart. And mindsets can only be changed by experiences, right? Because we know beliefs can only be changed by experiences. So what kind of rituals do you need to put in place? What kind of new experiences? What kind of, and these can be little things, right? It can be little things. And my sort of advice is, don't start with big things. Start with, over the next 2 to 3 years, where do I want to move the organization? And what are some sort of small rituals that today are derailing me that I need to eliminate? And what should I need to add? So a couple of years ago, I had a big telco, actually the third biggest at that time. They come to me, and then the biggest telco was my customer also. And they came to me, look, we are very innovative, but we're not very productive. And we are number 3, and we're far away from the top. We want to chase these guys. We want to be more productive. And so I said, again, we looked at mindsets, behaviors. And so we said, we need to cut some of these behaviors. We need to add some of these very innovative behaviors. And they had very fun, interesting rituals. They had a Friday night party every week where they would just chill, right? They called it the chill, right? And they would have alcohol. They had these, and people would sit there and talk, and they have so many ideas. Wow, they're very innovative. So every week there's opportunity. But when it comes to execution, when it comes to productivity, maybe not as good, right? So we say, okay, we need more productive rituals, productivity type rituals, and we need to, and you cannot pull a ritual out. Oh, people love it. There's grief when you pull out ritual. So you need to transition an old ritual into a new ritual, right? So my thing is, start with the simple stuff. But before you start, make sure you have a clear roadmap. Because if you are designing a culture, you're designing a culture to be able to enable you to achieve your end goal. The culture needs to be, the mindsets, the behaviors, and the skills need to be aligned to where the strategic imperatives of the organization is. And it's not just about creating a culture for the CEO or whoever is there, and being dictated by the leader, because the leader might leave in 3 years and things may change and so on. You want to build sort of a long-term and say, this is kind of the culture we're trying to build over the next couple of years to make sure we execute on a couple of key strategic imperatives. I'm not sure if that helps or that answers your question.
That's for sure. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. I've dropped in the survey link. Do feel free to share your thoughts. And if you have any questions, you can also drop them in the survey itself as well. Okay. Thank you everyone for coming. We hope you have a good day ahead.
All right. Take care, everyone. All the best.
Thanks. Bye-bye.